On this episode of the Athletic Potential Podcast, we are going to be discussing rotator cuff strength and when you have enough of it, as well as when baseball players should specialize into one sport. Welcome to the Athletic Potential Podcast, your place to come and get answers to your athletic development questions. We cover a range of topics, all related to helping you to achieve your athletic goals so that you can experience and enjoy the athletic career that you deserve. I am your host, Dr. Mike Matthews. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Athletic Potential Podcast. Thanks for being here. I just had this question asked to me right prior to the podcast recording, and one of my listeners asked, hey, we hear a lot about what you're doing at Athletic Potential. We hear a lot about, things that are going on, and that they really appreciated these updates. So let me just kind of update you a little bit. So for those that don't know what Athletic Potential is, it's a company I started. I'm a physical therapist and a strength and conditioning coach. And I work in a facility that houses a baseball academy and lots of different teams, mainly targeting, youth groups and those type of things. And so we've got a fairly large facility, enough to do an indoor 90-foot baseball diamond. Lots of cages, a freestanding bullpen by itself. We have technology we use. We have TrackMan. We have other cameras. We have a lot of different things that are at our disposal here. We have a full-size weight room that can take on any teams up to 50 or 60 at a time. And so it's a fairly large facility, and because of that, we're able to do a lot of different kind of fun things. And one of the things that is not, unique necessarily to this facility, but we're in the off season right now for professional baseball. And one of the things that we found is, especially in our climate, for those that listen and don't know where we are in Utah, and it gets cold in the winters. And typically it's snowing. Matter of fact, today it is snowing. And so you'll probably hear some bats clanging around and those type of things because we've got a college team in here practicing right now. So, but anyways, it's a unique facility in that we have a subset of population of our professional athletes, professional baseball players that come in and use this facility. And between a lot of the guys who work here at this facility, including myself, we help these guys in their off season. And so it's a pretty exciting time right now. We're just about to see some of these guys start going off. Matter of fact, we just had two of our players leave to head down to spring training, and we'll start seeing everybody leave here in the next week to 2 weeks, maybe even 3 weeks. So it's kind of exciting. We're starting to see these guys start ramp up, throwing harder, start taking more live swings. It's a fun environment to be a part of. That pretty much takes all morning for us, and it's unique in that we get to try a lot of different things as well. So, and this leads into a little bit of the questioning, but one of the questions I consistently get is we talk about rotator cuff strengthening, and the reason I bring this up today is we had this question given to us through the podcast, and it talks about rotator cuff strength and how do you know if you have enough rotator cuff strength. And so I've done podcasts on arm care in the past. If you go look back, you can probably find them. I'll try and try to hit the main points here. One of the things that I think a lot of people miss, and this is the reason I bring it up and talk about all of our pro guys, is this is a conversation I have with them all the time, is if you give a player a list of exercises and say this player is not rehabbing, is not trying to get his arm back up to his ability to be able to throw, but someone who's been able to throw, has been healthy, and is just trying to condition their arm to get them ready for a season, a pretty heavy season. What is the key in regards to shoulder strength, and how do you know if you have enough, or what are the right exercises? And we hear this all the time, and this is a conversation I always have. And so I wanted to bring it up on the podcast just a little bit, and I think it's something that is, I explain it today. Today will be more of a general overview, but what I'd like to do is at some point maybe take a deeper dive on the podcast and talk about shoulder strengthening for throwers. That won't be today, but today will be kind of the lead in. We'll probably see that podcast episode probably in the next month or so. And what I wanted to bring up today was there's two main things that I see most of our players and athletes, specifically our throwers, obviously, that they either they don't understand or it's misconstrued. And that is when we talk about rotator cuff strengthening and shoulder strengthening, I keep having guys go, hey, you shouldn't lift any more than 2 pounds. Hey, you shouldn't lift any more than, 1.5 pounds for that specific movement. Or, you shouldn't train the rotator cuff slow because it needs to work fast. And you hear all of these different things. So there's 2 things I want to pull out for this podcast episode. And this actually ties into a question that we got from Zach. And Zach asks, hey, how do you know when your rotator cuff is strong enough for baseball? And Zach, this will tie into that a little bit. And I can tell you this. We have seen, and bringing it back to our pro players, we have seen 2 or 3 pro guys come back now and that have continued to do the programming, continue to do our programming, and we've been able to track their progress in regards to shoulder strength. Now, the research documents this all the time. We know that shoulder strength for rotator cuff decreases over the course of the season, probably more than likely because of the eccentric or slowing down nature that the cuff has to do a lot of times. And so we see most of our guys come in the off season, the rotator cuffs are going to be a little bit on the weaker side. My goal with all of these guys is that when we test rotator cuff strength, and we don't just test rotator cuff strength, we test endurance, we test rate of force production as well. But if we're talking about just peak strength, peak force, what we found is when they come in the off season, they're down from when they left right before the start of the spring training time. And my goal is not to get them back to 0 or back to normal where they were before, but to enhance and increase that rotator cuff strength for the next year. Now, Zach, to answer your question directly, I don't have a number for that. I have a number based on their previous testing and now to their next testing. And I can tell you my goal is just to make that particular pitcher or thrower stronger than they were at the beginning of the season as soon as possible. And so to talk about strong enough, I think the key is that you've got to, if you can measure it, then you're going to know if you're making progress. You're going to know if you're doing the right things. You're going to know if what you're doing is actually making an effect to the rotator cuff. But the other thing is that if you look at rotator cuff strengthening, you've got to track progress and you've got to get it up to a certain level. Otherwise, what we see is a slow detriment effect over time to the rotator cuff strength, which then essentially puts more stress on the passive structures of the shoulder and the elbow. And then we know that leads to shoulder and elbow problems and injuries. So first things first, Zach, how do I know if it's strong enough? If you have pre-testing on the athlete, we need to make sure that athlete is strong or stronger at the beginning of the season than they were at the end of the season. If you don't have that data, I will tell you this: test both sides if you can. And we're still working. I'll be honest, we're still working on a nice little field test for people to do, so they can just kind of test it quickly. On the field using, either J-bands or something like that. We haven't figured out a good, reliable measure yet. But I can tell you this, that we want to see symmetry first. So their left arm should be as strong as their right arm if they're a left-hand thrower. If they're a right-hand thrower, we want to see their right arm as strong as their left arm, if not stronger, for their throwing arm. And if we're not seeing that, then we really kind of start targeting rotator cuff strength. And so I think that to answer your question, how strong is strong enough? We shouldn't ever see a decrease in rotator cuff strength, so you have to measure it. We should see an increase in strength over time. Now, that being said, let me bring back the comment of, hey, you should not use any more than 2 pounds on these exercises, right? And I can tell you this right now. I don't believe that. I think it needs to be progressive. If you are able to do plenty of sets and reps with a 2-pound weight for your arm care exercise, you need to go up in weight. I don't think there's a limit in weight so long as it's progressive and you show that you can manage and handle the weight effectively. So we've got the example I'll use is this. In our facility, we have a 5'6" baseball pitcher, and I guess he's 5'7". If he's listening to this, I apologize. He's 5'7", Doesn't weigh a whole lot. And he's over when he's doing his arm care exercises with the free weights. He's repping 2.5 pounds right now. We have a 6'5", 240-pound baseball pitcher who's also doing the same free weight exercises. Now, he's doing more weight because he's bigger. He has more muscle mass, and he should be able to move it around, right? Now, that doesn't mean that if you're smaller, you need to do less, and if you're bigger, you need to do more. But the idea is I wouldn't expect those two guys to lift the same amount of weight. I'd expect them to be a little different. And I would expect them both. Now, that being said, I would expect both to increase the amount of weight they can lift in their arm care exercises over the course of an off season. So I hope that answers your question, Zach. It's not a great answer. And realistically, I'm trying to think of if we take, man, it's hard to standardize. I really want to see okay, I'm going to go out on a limb. This is kind of a total guess based on what I've seen, based on some of the data that we've collected, but I don't have the data in front of me. I'm just going to go out on a limb a little bit. I really want to be able to see our 17, 18-year-old into college athletes able to perform our free weight routine of exercises with a 2.5 upwards to a 5-pound weight. It's really vague. I apologize. But realistically, that's what I want to see. So if you're 17, 18 and you barely can push 2 pounds around, your rotator cuff needs to be stronger. I would hope you'd be pushing towards the 5-pound range. If you've never trained your rotator cuff in the past, I wouldn't expect it to be there. So anyways, I hope that answers your question, Zach. So if you have youth players, just start them, get them going. Like I said, I think in our future podcast episode about rotator cuff strength, we're going to try to lay out some stuff that may help understand if kids are strong enough. So there's a second part to this that I wanted to bring up. It's not really part of Zach's question, but it's part of a question I get all the time, and that is, I always tell them, hey, you guys doing your arm care exercises, you guys doing shoulder and elbow work and all those kind of things, and most of the time what I get from the high schoolers is, we're doing our bands. And I said, are you doing just bands? And they say yes. And I go, okay, here's the deal. There's so many more exercises than just bands. And if you look at how the rotator cuff functions in the throwing motion, it has to essentially have a bit of endurance because it's going to get asked to do a lot of work, at high intensities. Now, it doesn't have to be like you hold this thing for 2 minutes and that's endurance. If you look at the normal throwing for a pitcher, they get up, they throw a pitch, and 9 to 11 seconds later, they throw another one. Then they throw another one, and then they throw another one. And so I don't know if it needs to be crazy like that. But the idea is that you do need to train endurance. You do need to train just general absolute strength or force. You do need to train ballistics, so like fast moving, getting the muscles to contract fast. Okay, and you need to train the rotator cuff to do what it actually is supposed to do. And the whole point of the rotator cuff is to hold the shoulder ball and socket together, keep the ball in the middle of the socket. And you've got to do some training that looks like that. And that isn't always bands and maybe some dumbbell exercises. So let me just give you a general layout of what I'm talking about here. And that is, with our arm care for most of our players, we are doing 4 different types. We are doing an isometric day, working predominantly on a little bit of a muscular endurance. We are doing a free weight day. This is where we're really trying to increase their ability to lift a heavier load with those rotator cuff muscles. Okay. We are doing a band day, which I like to use the bands for some sort of hybrid between peak force and endurance. I'll just go on a limb again. Bands are my least favorite form of arm care, of exercise. I know they work, and I got a lot of people saying to me, like, what are you talking about? They're the best thing. And I'm like, yeah, okay, but I feel like we can do better. So bands are my least favorite. It doesn't mean we don't use them. We still use them, but they're kind of my least prioritized. And the last thing we do is ballistics. This is like ball drops. So you catch and then bring the arm back to the original position as fast as possible. I can tell you right now, the ones we prioritize are the free weights, then the ballistics, then the isometrics, then the bands, if we use an order of priority. And so, and each one of those exercise sets is different. I shouldn't say different, is targeting similar muscle groups, but in different movements. And so we're really targeting the rotator cuff in every which way it can go. And we really try and strengthen it or teach it to do its job specific to the throwing motion. So arms are in the correct angles. We're moving quickly. We're trying to add perturbation, so trying to have them be reactive. The rotator cuff is a reactive muscle group. Anytime you go to move your head, or even not even lift an arm, even if you just turn, your rotator cuff has to activate to keep the ball in the middle of the socket. So it's something I don't want people to overlook, but it's something I've been getting, and I hesitated bringing up these details on the podcast today, mainly just because I feel like we're going to do one in the future, but I've had too many questions and I feel like it's appropriate. And then I got Zach's question, so we hit it a little bit. So sorry, a little bit of a rant, a little bit kind of all over the place. And I hope there's something you take out of it. If anything you're going to take out of it, it's this. Rotator cuff strengthening should be progressive. You should not be doing the same weight in the beginning of an off season at the end of an off season. It should be more. Don't forget to train the rotator cuff in different ways. That's probably the two takeaways I would say to walk away from. So, all right, was our first question. We kind of just jumped right into it. The second question comes from Miles, and this is another loaded question that most likely will be a pretty heavy podcast in the future. There's some interesting research that just came out. I'm a little biased with that, and I'll tell you why in just a second. But let's get to Miles' question. Miles asks, when do you recommend baseball players specialize in just baseball? What age? How do you know? Is it a good thing? Lots of questions, Miles. So let me put it this way. You've heard my take on early sports specialization. This isn't just for baseball, but I feel like it's for other sports as well, but we'll stick with baseball because Miles asked about baseball. I heavily encourage all of our athletes here at Athletic Potential to play multiple sports for as long as possible. It's not, that I think, well, I'll be honest, like if you look at what sports specialization does to athletes, yes, does it make them better at that particular sport sometimes? Yes. What it doesn't do is develop a broad foundation of athletic abilities that I think will only support and enhance and protect athletes later on when they do eventually specialize. Okay? So if there's a kid, if I have an athlete and they've played basketball, they played football, basketball, baseball, and they've played that all the way up into high school, and now we've got a kid who's sophomore, he's playing football and he wants to play baseball, maybe not basketball anymore. So say he plays football, baseball, and he's got coaches or whoever, his parents, it doesn't matter, that are saying, hey, you need to specialize in baseball. That's your only sport. You need to stay with that. I always ask the athlete first, what do you want to do? Like, is football something you're doing for fun? Is it something you're doing to be with friends? Is it something you're doing because you feel obligated? Those are all key questions because realistically, the desire to play that other sport makes a difference. Okay. And then I always say, like, well, look, from a baseball perspective, you're going to be a better baseball player if you run faster, if you can cut harder, if you're more reactive, if you're more explosive. All those things are going to make you a better baseball player. And what I think people miss with sports specialization, they say, yeah, but he's going to be like, if he's out there taking ground balls every day and he's playing multiple games throughout the entire year, he's going to see a lot of pitches. He's going to develop because he's going to see better competition. And look, all good arguments. I get it. But here's how kids develop athleticism. It's by volume of activity. The issue isn't that the issue isn't that they're not becoming athletic with baseball. They are, but very specific to baseball only. Their foundation is very small. It's hard to develop enough repetitions, enough volume of repetitions without playing another sport to develop a more broad foundation. Can you train it in the weight room? Yes. It is difficult because unless you've got a kid who has, a significant amount of motivation and wants to be in the weight room and train, we can train it. But I can tell you right now, I'd rather have a kid go out and play football or soccer or basketball because they're going to learn so much more, and the volume that they'll put in to improving their athleticism will be much, much higher in that particular sport than they were if they're trying to train in the weight room. So, Miles, when should baseball players specialize? As late as possible. It's not a popular answer nowadays. I know. I typically get some pushback, and I always tell everybody, look, I'm not asking you to go be on a travel football team or an elite level football team. I'm not asking you to be on a travel base or a basketball team and go play in a whole bunch of tournaments in different states. I'm not asking that. You can go play recreationally. You can go play, play pickup basketball, hockey, football, those type of things. That will work. That will still work. It doesn't have to be as serious, but I mean, just go play those things. We've talked about it in the past, and we always seem to talk about this in regards to injury prevention, or kids that don't or specialize early, they typically get hurt more. There's some research out there to suggest that may be the case. If you pitch more than 9 months a year, then you're at an increased risk of arm injury. Yes, that's out there. Arm fatigue is the number one predictor of injury. Yes. And I agree with all those things. And I highly encourage kids not to play multiple or play baseball year round. I don't know if it helps them that much, but Miles, I guess what I'm getting at is I would play as many sports as long as I possibly could. Yeah, if you specialize early, there may be some advantages to it. But the interesting thing is there's a research article that just came out by Christopher Camp out of the Mayo Clinic that I had a personal hand in. We basically took surveys of high school athletes and asked them a bunch of questions, one of which was, when did you specialize, those type of things. We also measured velocity. We measured a lot of different things. It's a good article. And it wasn't just athletes here in Utah. We studied athletes here in Utah. We studied athletes where Mayo is. We studied athletes across the country on another side, northwestern, southwestern area. We have a lot of athletes that all filled the survey out, and we had metrics on in those type of things. And what we found in the research was essentially that if you specialized early, you were no more likely than those that played multiple sports to be playing a higher level of baseball. That's a massive, massive generalization. And I'll dive into the article a little bit more, and maybe we'll kind of do it as a follow-up. But yeah, I tell everybody, I cite that study and I say, a lot of these, there's no difference. Like, there was either no difference, or if the difference was, it was in favor of the multiple sport athletes. So yeah, so Miles, I would just play as many sports as you can, as long as you can, right? And I think you'll be better off. And again, that's a pretty generalized statement. I understand there's pressures there, financial pressures. You got coaches that may be saying, hey, if you don't play year round with us, you're not on our team. I get it. I have a softball age 11-year-old softball player right now, and I'm getting pressure on it all the time. Hey, are you going to put her in you're going to put her with a softball team and have her go play, in these tournaments? And heck, the team that I talked to, they had a tournament in October, November, December, 2 in January, and now 1 in February. And I'm like, in Utah, I'm like, there's snow on the ground. I don't know how you guys are practicing, but that I get it. There's that's out there. And my daughter right now is not playing on that team. She's doing gymnastics. And we talked about maybe doing some basketball, but she didn't really want to, so I didn't force her. But she plays around. She plays other sports. She tries things, and that's all I really care about, that she's developing kind of athleticism generally. And, she likes softball, so we're going to play softball again. And it's a tough question, Miles, but I would tell you this. Multiple sports as long as possible seems to be the best route as of right now. So thanks. Hey, I appreciate it. For those listening to the podcast, I really appreciate you either reaching out with questions or at least listening to the podcast. Just know that we want to answer as many questions as we possibly can, so please send your questions in. You can do that through the website. You can do that through the link in Apple Podcasts. There's a link there. You just click that. It'll send you to the website. Click on the link to ask a question, and we'll get that question on the air and answered for you. If you have a specific question, you can always just email me. That's on the website as well. We do appreciate you taking the time, and until next time, thanks. Hey everybody, I just want to say thank you for listening to the Athletic Potential Podcast. If you do have questions for the podcast, please visit the website www.athletic-potential.com/podcast. you'll find a button there to ask your question. Please input your information and your question, and we will answer any and all questions we get. And thank you again for listening. If you do get a chance, please rate and review the podcast. And until next time, thanks.